When I opened the front door, I never expected my life was about to change forever. My ex-boyfriend had driven over 1,000 miles, which might sound like a grand romantic gesture. But the night would end with his arrest for attempted murder of me. Around 6 p.m. on a Saturday in October, there was a knock at the front door. To my surprise, my ex had driven from 4 states away, and before I knew it, he was inside my townhouse. With one hand, he lifted me by the throat, pinning me against the door while locking it with the other. He then carried me by the throat across the living room, throwing me so hard against the wall that my head went through it. I landed on the couch below, where his fist met my face, before his hands returned to my neck, continuing to strangle me as I fought to breathe. What is happening? My brain was spinning. He'd never hit me before. Yet the next several hours involved more of the same. At one point, I made a break for the door, but he got to me before I could open it. He lifted me with such force I practically flew into the air, both hands squeezing tightly around my neck and pressing me against the door with all of his might, and I knew I was going to die. And saw my lifeless, crumpled body on the blue and gold doormat that lay beneath my dangling feet. But as unexpectedly as it began, it ended. He left as though nothing had happened, saying we would hang out the next day. None of it made any sense. But the second he was gone, I grabbed my keys and drove off. The emotion of the evening wouldn't come until later. I was in shock. I called the cops from my car, and an officer met me in a strip mall parking lot. We stood on opposite sides of our cars, and she told me she could see my injuries from where she was. She wanted him arrested that night and asked if I would call him to meet me. I didn't want to, but I knew it was the only way to find him. Now it was my turn to pretend like nothing had happened and make the call. "I'll buy you a beer," I said. He said to give him 10 minutes, and he was there in 2. It's still unnerving to know he hadn't gone far. But he was arrested upon arrival. I finally fell apart. But the nightmare wasn't over. It's ironic that he held me prisoner for several hours, yet I'd held myself prisoner in life long before he knocked on the door. 2 months prior to that night, I remember sitting on the back porch feeling numb and deflated. I'd been mentally beating myself up for weeks. I was smart in high school. How did I get here? I was young and met a boy. But now I just felt trapped in a dead-end job, in the wrong relationship, and couldn't see a way out. I'd considered leaving before, but the stigma of quitting or giving up too soon always stopped me. You're supposed to fight to make things work, right? Except he was no longer making an effort. Between the toxic work environment and the now full-blown alcoholic I was living with, I felt like I was on a sinking ship. And if I didn't jump, I was going down with it. But all I could see were limitations as to why I couldn't leave. It was more than bills to pay and feeling obligated to care for him. I didn't even know what I wanted. Change is hard when all you see are obstacles, and inaction is easy because it's comfortable. Inaction, or indecision, will leave you sitting where you are, idling at the stop sign of life, going nowhere. Until you put your foot on the gas. But how? I felt like he needed to be the one to leave because I was paying for everything, but I would have felt guilty putting him on the street. What'd Confucius say? Life is simple. But we insist on making it complicated. Yeah, I'd mastered that. However, the day I realized I could pay for him to move away and go live with his family was the day I got my freedom. He was gone and I could do whatever. There was just one problem. I'd been taught how to be a responsible adult, not how to enjoy my life. I stayed where I was because I had a lease and bills to pay. What if a new job didn't pay enough? The internal pressure to have everything perfectly sorted before doing anything else was so overwhelming, I decided getting out of the relationship was good enough and gave up. As long as I didn't have to spend another day with him, I could suck it up until the lease ran out. And that's where I made my mistake. Because what if he comes back? Never occurred to me. But why did I need something terrible to happen before realizing living a life I wanted was worth the effort? Why does anyone? It's only when something tragic happens that we become acutely aware of the brevity of life. It can end at any moment, like on a blue and gold doormat. By choosing to stay where I wasn't giving myself an opportunity to discover a life I enjoyed before it was too late. The impact of my inaction almost cost my life. And I'm happy it didn't, but it cost in other ways. The 13 months from ending the relationship until he was sentenced felt like a sentence of my own. Everything I was trying to avoid by staying where I was happened anyway. I couldn't return to the townhouse and had to break the lease. Despite what happened, they wouldn't let me out of it, and I had to pay until it was re-rented, which meant keeping the job because now I needed money for 2 rents and flexibility for court dates. It took a couple months to recover from the physical injuries, but I still have issues with anything close to my neck or impacting my breathing, not to mention the occasional nightmare. What he did was so unexpected that no one would have been surprised if I had crawled into a corner and stayed there. But for me, it was a second chance. It was a literal punch in the face to get off my butt and go start living. It took a while to get through the hearings, the trial, and the sentencing. But once it was over, I was quicker to take action. Take my job. Shortly after he was sentenced, there was a meeting at work where I was told I could no longer laugh because the staff felt like I was laughing at them. Seriously? Laughing is part of me as much as my eyes are brown. This isn't something new I just started doing. It was so absurd. But it was the shove I needed. So I quit and laughed right out the door. I didn't have anything figured out, but I wasn't staying there. Now what? How do you start over? It was like graduating high school all over again, deciding what to do with your life, only this time with more bills. But I wanted to make sure I started living a life I wouldn't regret. And perhaps the lack of oxygen rewired my thinking because the way I looked at everything had changed. Work didn't need to be a consistent 9-to-5 job. Housing didn't mean signing a year-long lease. I loved to travel. I could rent a room anywhere. The more I ventured into the unknown, the more opportunities I discovered. Have you ever done something for the first time and it completely changed your life? This was that. By taking action, I was creating a life I never would have imagined possible had I stayed where I was. Today I'm happier, less stressed, more patient and kind. Imagine what the world would be like if all of us lived that way. We speak openly about mental health, yet it still seems taboo to say, this isn't working for me, and I'm worth more. We convince ourselves that tolerating the wrong job or the wrong relationship Isn't that bad? Or we compare ourselves to others who seem to have it worse and think, we have no right to complain. But you only get one life, and there is no shame in wanting to enjoy it. So if you're feeling trapped in your life like I was, stop waiting for a knock of your own before you do something, or the impact of your inaction is going to leave you exactly where you are. And if you can't see a way out, I'll shine my light for you. Thank you.